Your brother deserves it. My mother said it like she was announcing the weather, calm and ordinary, while I stood in the middle of the dining room with my overnight bag still hanging from my shoulder. On the table sat the folder that should have had my name on half the papers. The house. The cash accounts. My father's company shares. Everything had been signed over to my younger brother, Mason, while I was upstairs packing the last of my clothes. Nobody looked ashamed. My father kept his eyes on his coffee. Mason leaned back in my chair like he had been born there. My mother folded her hands and gave me that tight smile she used whenever she wanted cruelty to sound like reason. He has a family to think about, she added. I remember staring at the chandelier because I knew if I looked directly at her, I would say something I could never take back. I was 34 years old, freshly divorced, and somehow standing in the house I had helped save after Dad's stroke like I was a stranger asking for spare change. So I said nothing. I picked up my bag. I walked out. Nobody followed. A month later, my phone lit up with my mother's name. Mortgages due. Please help your brother. I stared at that message and finally smiled. I didn't reply right away. I let her message sit there while I stood in my small rental kitchen, staring at a cracked tile I hadn't bothered fixing. Funny how silence felt different now. Back then, it had been survival. Now it felt like control. Because the truth was, I knew that house better than anyone. After Dad's stroke 3 years ago, I was the one who handled everything. Insurance calls, bank meetings, contractors. I found the refinancing option that kept the place from being sold. I negotiated the terms. I signed documents on Dad's behalf when his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Mason showed up twice. Once for a photo, once to ask if anything had been left for him. And still, they gave him everything. I opened my phone again and reread my mother's message. There was no apology, no hesitation, just expectation like I had always been the backup plan they could quietly rely on when things went wrong. I typed slowly, your child, your responsibility. Then I hit send and set the phone down. It rang within seconds. I didn't pick up. It rang again, and again. By the 7th call, I finally answered, already knowing the tone I would hear. But it wasn't my mother. It was Mason. And he sounded scared. Mia? I need to talk to you. Hearing my name in Mason's voice felt strange, like he had just remembered I existed. There was no confidence in him now. No smug tone. Just something tight, almost breathless. I leaned against the counter, calm. You got everything you wanted. What's left to talk about? Silence stretched for a second. I could hear movement behind him, maybe pacing. It's not that simple, he said. The mortgage, it's higher than I thought. Of course it was. I closed my eyes briefly, remembering the paperwork I had handled, the clauses I had flagged, the numbers I had warned my parents about. Numbers they dismissed because they trusted Mason's future plans more than my actual work. How much? I asked. He hesitated. We're behind already. A quiet exhale left me before I could stop it. Not shock. Just confirmation. And the company? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. It's complicated. That word again. Complicated. The same word my mother used whenever she avoided truth. I walked to the window, watching the empty street below. You didn't read anything, did you? I said softer now. I trusted Dad. Mason snapped, a flicker of defensiveness returning. No, I thought. You trusted being handed things. Then he said something that made me go completely still. They're saying I owe more than the house is worth. They're saying I owe more than the house is worth. Mason's voice cracked on the last word, like it physically hurt to admit it. I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, staring at my reflection in the dark window, seeing someone calmer than I felt. Did you open the red folder? I asked. What red folder? Of course. I pressed my lips together, holding back the laugh that almost slipped out. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. Second drawer in Dad's office desk, I said. Left side. It was labeled. There was shuffling on his end. A drawer opening. Papers rustling. Then silence. Long, heavy silence. What is this? Mason finally whispered. That, I said quietly. is the loan restructure I negotiated after Dad's stroke. He didn't speak, so I continued. The house wasn't saved. It was leveraged. The company wasn't thriving. It was bleeding. I kept both alive by tying them together under one condition. My heartbeat stayed steady, even as my grip tightened on the phone. They had to be managed carefully. Every payment, every deadline. Mason's breathing turned uneven. Why didn't anyone tell me? I almost smiled. Because they never listened to me. They thought you'd figure it out, I said. Then I added, softer, sharper. But here's the part they didn't understand. I paused. I built an exit. The words hung there, quiet and final. Mason didn't interrupt this time. I could hear him breathing, slower now, like he understood this wasn't something he could argue with. What kind of exit? He asked. I moved back to the counter, picking up my glass of water, not drinking it, just holding it. The kind that protects the person doing the work, I said. Not the ones taking credit for it. There was a tremor in his voice now. Mia, and what does that mean for me?
For you.
Not for us. Not for the family. Just him. It means the structure I set up had a failsafe, I replied. If payments weren't maintained, ownership didn't just collapse. It shifted. Shifted where? He asked quickly. I let a small silence stretch. To the only person listed as operational guarantor. Another pause. Then, quieter. Who is that? I finally took a sip of water. Steady, controlled. Mason, I said, almost gently. You never asked a single question before signing anything. I trusted Mom and Dad, he said, defensive again but weaker. I nodded to myself. And they trusted you to carry something they never understood. His voice dropped. So, who owns it now? I didn't rush the answer. Because this was the moment everything changed. I do. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything he had said before. No anger this time. No denial. Just the slow realization settling in. That's not possible, Mason finally said, but it sounded hollow, like he didn't believe it himself. It is, I replied. You signed the transfer clause when you took over. It was buried in the restructure agreement. Missed 2 consecutive payments and operational control defaults to the guarantor. You tricked me, he snapped. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see it.
No.
I protected myself. There's a difference. I could hear something drop on his end. Papers, maybe the folder slipping from his hands. What happens now? He asked, quieter. I walked to my small table and sat down, steady, grounded. Now the house, the company, and the debt all move under my control, I said. Which means I decide what stays and what doesn't. His breathing picked up again. And Mom and Dad? He asked. I let that question sit for a moment, because that was the part none of them had considered. They don't get to decide anything anymore, I said calmly. A long pause. Then his voice, barely above a whisper. They're going to lose everything, aren't they? They're going to lose everything, aren't they? Mason's voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. Not angry, not entitled, just scared. For the first time, he wasn't speaking like the son who had been handed everything. He sounded like someone realizing nothing had ever truly been his. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I let the silence stretch long enough for the truth to settle, without me saying it. They made their choices, I said finally, just like you did. That's not fair, he said quickly, but there was no strength behind it.
Fair.
That word used to matter to me. I used to fight for it, explain it, beg for it in quiet conversations that ended with me apologizing for things I didn't do. Not anymore. You didn't ask questions, I continued, calm and steady. You didn't read anything. You just took what they gave you, because it felt easier. And you just walked away? He asked. No, I said softly. I stopped protecting people who never protected me. He didn't respond. For a moment, I almost felt something close to sympathy. Almost. Then my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Mason. It was my mother. And the message she sent made my chest tighten. I opened my mother's message and read it twice. We're at the house. There are people here. They're saying we have 30 days. What did you do? For a second, I just stared at the screen. Not shocked. Not confused. Just still. Like everything had finally aligned into something clean and undeniable. I stood by the window, watching the quiet street below, remembering the night I walked out with a single bag while they stayed inside, comfortable in what they believed was theirs. Now strangers stood in that same house, reading them the truth. I typed slowly. I didn't do anything. I just stopped fixing it for you. The typing bubble appeared instantly. Please come. We need to talk. I looked at that word need and felt nothing. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Just distance. For years, I carried everything quietly. Their problems. Their expectations. Their silence when I needed them most. Now they were standing inside the consequences of their own decisions. And I was finally standing outside of it. I set my phone down without replying again. Some endings don't need a conversation. Some people don't need closure. They just need to live with what they chose.